The story of Richard Wagner reveals one of history's most complex questions. Can we separate genius from controversy? What I'm about to tell you involves documented historical facts, but like many historical figures, Wagner's legacy involves ongoing scholarly debates and different interpretations. Right, let's talk about Richard Wagner. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, brilliant. Another dead German composer. How thrilling. But stick with me here, because this particular dead German composer managed to create some of the most beautiful music ever written, whilst also being, well, let's just say he wouldn't be invited to many dinner parties today. Wagner wasn't just any composer. This man wrote massive, epic operas that lasted for hours. And I do mean hours. We're talking 4-hour productions where people die spectacularly while singing at the top of their lungs. Very German, really. His most famous piece is probably Ride of the Valkyries. You know, that dramatic helicopter scene from Apocalypse Now where everything goes absolutely mental. Those thundering, heroic themes that make you feel like you could conquer nations. That's Wagner. The man knew how to write music that made people feel powerful, and that's where our story gets rather complicated. You see, Wagner lived in the 1800s, a time when antisemitism was unfortunately quite common across Europe. But Wagner took it to another level entirely. He wrote essays, actual published essays, expressing deeply anti-Semitic views. He believed Jewish people were corrupting German culture, which is both historically wrong and morally reprehensible. The documented evidence shows Wagner himself held and expressed these awful views during his lifetime. Here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Decades after Wagner died, a little Austrian fellow with a rather unfortunate moustache became absolutely obsessed with him. Adolf Hitler claimed Wagner as his spiritual predecessor, saying anyone who wanted to understand Nazi Germany must know Wagner. Hitler didn't just enjoy the music, he weaponized it. Wagner's operas became the soundtrack to Nazi rallies, with all those soaring, powerful themes twisted into something sinister. Now, here's the thing about Hitler's obsession with Wagner. It wasn't entirely one-sided. Wagner's daughter-in-law Winifred actually became quite chummy with Hitler. She ran the Bayreuth festival, which was basically Wagner's personal music festival, and she welcomed Hitler with open arms. So whilst Wagner himself died long before the Nazis existed, his family actively courted that connection. Lovely bunch, really. The result of all this is that Wagner's music became forever linked with one of history's greatest evils. Those beautiful, stirring melodies that should inspire joy instead became associated with hatred and genocide. It's rather like finding out your favorite childhood song was actually written by a serial killer. It changes everything, doesn't it? This brings us to Israel, where Wagner's music remains largely taboo to this day. There's no official law banning it, but there's a powerful cultural understanding that Wagner simply isn't performed. The Israeli orchestras have occasionally attempted to play his pieces, but it's always met with protests and walkouts. Imagine survivors of the Holocaust hearing those same melodies that once accompanied their persecution. It's not difficult to understand why Wagner remains unwelcome. In 2001, conductor Daniel Barenboim caused a massive controversy when he played Wagner as an encore in Jerusalem. After a 30-minute audience debate, imagine that, a live debate in a concert hall. Most people stayed to hear it and applauded enthusiastically. But the next day, politicians who hadn't even been there called it a scandal. Rather telling, isn't it? Now, you've probably heard people say that Wagner's influence can be heard everywhere in modern music, that he basically invented techniques that film composers still use today. Well, it turns out that story is a bit more complicated than people usually tell it, and music historians continue to debate these connections. Wagner certainly was influential in many ways, but some of the specific claims about his direct impact on modern film music are disputed by scholars. Different music experts have varying views on these influences, and it's worth noting that musical development is often more complex than simple, this composer influenced that composer stories. But here's the fascinating bit. These myths about Wagner's influence became so widespread that they're almost more important than the reality. The film industry loved claiming connections to Wagner because it made their work sound more sophisticated and important. So we're left with this rather uncomfortable question. What do we do with beautiful art created by terrible people? Do we throw it all away? Do we pretend the person doesn't matter? Or do we somehow find a way to appreciate the art whilst condemning the artist? Some argue that music is just sound waves. It can't be inherently evil. Others believe that art is inseparable from its creator and the context in which it was made and later used. There's no simple answer, which is probably why this debate has been raging for decades. What makes Wagner particularly complicated is that his antisemitism wasn't just a side note to his biography. It was a significant part of who he was. Some scholars argue you can hear his ideology in his operas, particularly in how he portrayed certain characters. Others strongly disagree, saying the music transcends the man's personal failings. These debates continue among musicologists and historians with no clear consensus. It's worth noting that many Jewish musicians and composers, both during Wagner's lifetime and after, grappled with this same question. Some converted to Christianity partly to advance their careers in Wagner's musical world. Others rejected Wagner entirely. Even today, Jewish musicians have different views on performing his work. The uncomfortable truth is that history is full of brilliant people who held terrible views. Should we judge historical figures by the standards of their time or by our standards today? Wagner's anti-Semitism was unfortunately common in 19th century Europe, but that doesn't make it acceptable. It just makes the whole thing more complex. Different historians approach these questions differently, and there's ongoing scholarly discussion about how to contextualize historical figures like Wagner. Perhaps the most honest approach is to acknowledge all of it: the musical achievements, the personal failings, the historical context, and the ongoing impact. We can recognize Wagner's contributions to music whilst condemning his anti-Semitism. We can understand why his music was used for evil purposes while still appreciating its artistic qualities. We can respect why some people choose not to engage with his work whilst defending others' right to do so. What we can't do is pretend any of this is simple. Wagner forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about art, morality, and how we remember the past. Every time we hear those powerful, sweeping melodies, whether in a concert hall or a cinema, we're participating in that conversation. The story of Wagner reminds us that humans are complicated creatures, capable of creating both beauty and ugliness, sometimes simultaneously. History isn't a fairy tale with clear heroes and villains. It's messier than that, more human than that. In our current age of moral absolutes, Wagner presents an uncomfortable challenge. He can't be easily dismissed as a product of his times, nor can his contributions be simply erased. He exists in that grey area that makes us squirm, neither wholly good nor entirely dismissible. Perhaps what's most unsettling about Wagner is that he forces us to confront a truth we'd rather ignore, that creativity and cruelty can coexist in the same person. We'd prefer our artists to be either saints or sinners. It's so much tidier that way. But Wagner won't let us off that easily. And maybe that's exactly what we need. Maybe grappling with these contradictions is what keeps us human. Not to excuse them, not to ignore them, but to acknowledge that people are capable of extraordinary complexity. So can we separate the genius from the monster? I suppose that depends on you. What I can tell you is that asking the question is more important than having a tidy answer. Because the moment we stop wrestling with these difficult questions about art, morality, and human nature, we've probably lost something essential about what makes us human. And that, I think, would be the real tragedy.